Define magical. Magical is something special. And it's something that it's a personal type of specialness. That's the way I see it. Mystical, could be mystical if you're a mystical person. Something that's not easily duplicated. Something that you always remember. But magical, you know, I still get it when I come down here.
It was astounding. It was like, you know, you thought of all these ideal ways of living that people were doing in the 60s. I mean, I went to Morning Star Commune, you know, New Mexico. I mean, I did all that, and there was so much lack of authenticity in how people were trying to live, that they really weren't living it. And what astounded me at the beach was it didn't matter really what you looked like, how much money you had. It was like everyone got down to their bathing suit, literally, and were naked for each other. And it was who you are in relationship to the whole. It was really built upon true friendships and true caring for each other. And that was like so refreshing. I mean, it was something I had fantasized about finding, and it's like, just kind of landed there.
This is a very creative neighborhood. Not, you know, not for sissies, you know, for real producing artists, and anybody that knows anything is that's harder and harder and harder and harder to do. It's very difficult to continue being an artist in a third world economy, which is what we're constructing for ourselves. People need places to work. They continue. We have no choice. In fact, as it gets more and more difficult to survive and endure as a creative person, paradoxically, it becomes more important to do. Of course, distribution becomes a problem because, you know, who's buying it unless it's lies or porn?
So my little house was like a tree house. Doors didn't even close, all right? And one of the rooms was like a skylight out of plastic, kind of, and I left it open. So, I mean, I had frogs and grass growing in one of my rooms. So it was here, and there's this big hedge, and then I had a water bed outside with my kumquat trees and all my trees right around my little water bed.
I lived in about 10 different houses. And the most I ever paid was $100 a month. That's pretty good for living on a private beach.
This is the old living room. It's a lot darker now and with all the windows boarded up. House has no heat or air conditioning, so we had a wood stove.
Look at the beautiful
We never used this front door. We only went in and out the back door, and it was really nice. You kind of didn't really notice the highway. I want to try and rebuild this room somewhere someday, but that might be too much living in the past. I don't know.
All the houses were right on the sand. And that was where I had my first garden. I actually hauled in dirt and put a couple feet of dirt on the sand. The guy who was the main Cantique guy, the bear, he lived on the beach, and in the house I used to live in, we could sit out in the water surfing and listen to his collection of records.
There's different sections here, and we were on Topanga. our addresses, and some people actually had their address right on Pacific Coast Highway behind the sushi bar. But a bulk of the people lived down in what we call the Rodeo Grounds.
This community was much more connected to the beach because a lot of the surfers lived over here also. And especially when the houses got torn down there, that's when many of us moved over here. You know, so we've kind of like lived on the beach, the state bought that, then we moved over here, and then the floods came in 79, in 78, 79, wiped out this. A lot of it just kind of moved around as situations forced us to move, you know? But a lot of people didn't want to leave this life, I'll tell you that.
This was my art studio and a lot of other people's art studios. It was kept as a kind of open space for people to create and to make work. We did a lot of performance, a lot of theater rehearsal, a lot of music here. Had, you know, hundreds of artists, dozens of painters. We had a lot of sculptors over here. Mostly Jean-Baptiste ran a sculpture workshop in that other outbuilding here. This was the centerpiece to my little community within this larger community. And I've been running around in this area for my entire life, and you know, and certainly in the last 20 years I've been, you know, here. And now it's like this, you know? And I guess they're tearing it all down. This is what's happening. So the last remnants of it are gonna just fall into memory and still be still be a really profound part of my experience. How do you live inside of that memory? You know, like a great love affair.
Well, actually, my house on the beach was the same process as this. It was taken over by the state.
The LA Athletic Club wanted to develop the property for a long time. They were never able to do any development, so the rest of us got a great place to live for a long time.
Topanga Beach was one of those places where people always come back to. And that was one of the greatest things about living there. It was people who came in the town who'd been living in New York or somewhere else around the world for a few years. When they came back to LA, they went to Topanga Beach. And so if you lived there, you always saw this flow of people coming and going. The same people would come back, and that was one of the pleasures. And that's probably, I was going to say maybe that's part of the definition of a community, but it's even a little more than that. It's a larger community.
The state's removing the houses, and there's 21 of them left. Well, there used to be 71 houses and 11 businesses, so they're going to leave one house, so they'll have torn down 70, you know, old homes.
I've been a lot of places, and I've, you know, lived a lot of different lives. I had a whole incarnation in New York as a fine artist. Hung out with Andy Warhol, you know, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and Keith Haring was one of my friends. Knew that whole scene, international, did the whole Venice Biennale, Basel Arts Festival, you know, blah-de-blah. As far as art scenes go, art scenes is the event of an art scene. This, in my experience, was second to none. It was the most productive, most liberated magnet for creative people that I ever anticipate to experience and I'd ever seen before. This was an art scene composed of artists that were glued together with powerful bonds of affection, and it was run in a kind of anarchistic, laissez-faire sort of situation.
You proved yourself on how authentic you were, how real you were, and that you left behind all this sort of pretentiousness. And I think that's why people came there. And I mean, you had all those kinds of people who found it so refreshing that they could get away from what they were supposed to be. And I think if you came with that sincerity, you were welcomed.
Topanga Beach was unique because it was a little private surfing beach close to a big city, but it was out in the country originally. When we lived there, there were no streetlights, so the coast highway was kind of dark.
There's a guy named Jerry who down at the end had a place and like a studio, but he did all the stained glass for moon shadows and all those places. And so when we really needed cash, because most of us bartered, you know, like I'd make my breads and somebody else would make tortillas and eggs, but when we needed cash, we all went and worked at Jerry's and did stained glass so we could get paid real money to pay the rent.
I ran kind of a sort of shamanic, timeless, psychedelic workshop where we explored time-space. So if we're going to go to the stars, and we are, and we have been, and we're from the stars, and we're of the stars, we're going to have to investigate some more specific and effective means of looking at it and observing time-space. And part of that is an appreciation of atemporality. We live in a medium that is a medium composed of space and time as two aspects of a single membrane, operating simultaneously like the blue and the green of a butterfly's wing. What we learned here in a lot of our workshops and a lot of our sort of trips out by the campfire and so on in the rodeo grounds was that there's this thing called atemporality, which is not to be on the timeline or to be empowered in the sequence of events, like, you know, a piece of cinema that you edit this piece of tape and join it with that piece of tape. It's to leave the timeline altogether and to be above the timeline, or to be senior to the timeline, where, okay, yeah, there's the timeline, and there's that timeline, and there's that timeline, and look, there's the future, and there's the past, and they're all coexisting simultaneously. And so people talk about the spirits here, and the fairies here, and the creatures here. And there are, I mean, there's incredibly powerful, powerful wills, just pure wills, floating around and hovering around in these bushes and in these mountains. And in the right, you know, using the right attitude towards it, you can have, you know, very rich experiences. And you can experience this place thousands of years ago and thousands of years into the future when this is underwater. You know, you can be here with it from an atemporal perspective.
Thoreau said, you know, how quickly a path gets beaten in, you know, and you follow it without thinking, but the path kind of went here, if you can kind of see, and the creek ran there. So actually this is the way we kind of went to the rodeo grounds often, and then you could follow the creek and go down the beach.
Typical day would end with people walking out to the point, Topanga Point, to watch the sun go down. And that's another sad thing about losing this place, because this is, from a social point of view, a cultural point of view, maybe one of those things from the past that shouldn't be lost.
Back in the 1820s, property rights disappeared for citizenship in this country. Yeah, really, and that's not what America is about. And I think I teach so much about the American dream and what it was in different time periods. And I think that this was a retreat back to a very old vision, you know, an old vision that that has been lost.
Right now are the Tongva tribes and the Chumash tribes meeting and communing with each other and having an experience and being annihilated and being born and discovering nature and their lives. And this place was and is the place of gossip, and known in the Tongva Ergot language as the place of gossip. They would come here to trade goods, food, venison, seafoods, fruits, you know, all sorts of storytelling. They would come and meet and greet, and it's an amazing, you know, repository. I was present to a lot of these kind of atemporal experiences that were here, and you know, the trees, they all take on the characters of the people that lived here. This room you know, holds a great deal of the, you know, the characters that people that live here. It's sort of mad. The Rodeo Grounds is a you know, super ancient and could be, or would be if I was in control of something, I would designate it as shamanic space and make it, you know, official.
So when you live here and you go into town, it's not, you always want to come back here. That's the nice thing about having a good home in a community. You like to be there.
Yeah, we had all the amenities. We were both contractors. We had our shop over there and storage sheds and a big garden, and that was just really nice.
One of the fascinating things, for instance, about Topanga Beach, the whole time growing up, from my childhood, I only remember it as a nude beach. Somewhere during the 80s, that got pushed back. They were like, oh, we can't have naked people. Oh, people have, oh, we don't want to know about genitals. So my experience wasn't like coming out of the oppressive 50s and into the free and awakened 60s. My experience was watching the free and awakened 60s get turned back into, you know, the log jam, the cultural log jam of, you know, the 80s and the 90s, and now what?
I think what happened in the 80s with the sort of new community was more about an interest too in fame and fortune, not fortune much, but being that eccentric artist, yeah? Where that was not what was happening here before. I really think it was all about how we can all live together, and that's what changed. It became more self-engaged, you know, me, myself, and how I am the, you know, the starving artist, or, you know, this or that. I mean, it was not about how we are together as a whole.
We had like such amazing transformations. People would come down here and they'd be like, oh no, what are these weirdos? And then they'd, you know, within a day or two, they'd turn into the weirdest weirdo you ever saw. And they'd be like, wow, I never knew I was so unique. You know, and you know, it was like, you know, 20 years of therapy in a couple of days. Amazing. Creating artists is more interesting than creating art fully. Because creating art, fine art's just about storage. It's just about storage and salesmanship. You either sell it or you store it. But artists go on forever banging their head against the floor. This is the fire pit, and this is the ashes of 100 billion trees, yeah. Basically, this is our media. We didn't have television down here, but we would sit in front of the fire. And that's still all I do. You know, now I just have a fire pit in a parking lot.
With the sort of high-tech world that we've created, we've become so alienated from each other. We're even lost from ourselves. We're so disconnected from our humanity that what we desperately need is to be loved and be connected to each other. So I think we're going to have to get back to the basic idea.
This is where I lived, and it's all gone now. It's just it's all overgrown. Amazing how fast it grows up.
Lots and lots of barbecues. Yeah. 18 years. Miss the place. Yeah.
Strange stories, amazing facts. I mean, could it be a better title? The poetry never stopped.
It was tremendously complicated. You know, complicated social fabric. And if you think about it, maybe that's all anybody really wants. Maybe that's the only commodity. mean, people think you want beer, you want the internet, or you want an SUV, or you want this, or you want that. You want crackers or Oreos or a blow-up love doll. But really, I mean, what people really, really want is each other and a profound social experience. That's what ostensibly, all the other things are prelude to.
Most people here, what drove them in life was not wealth, materialism at all.
What did drive them?
It sounds so corny. Love.
That's why communities are valuable. That's why we have them. It's not just a containment policy. It's not just crowd control. There's a sort of an educational function to a community where you do learn, it does civilize you. You do learn about, people's likes and dislikes. You do learn to divine the subtleties of communication.
I teach about it every year for 20 years, over and over. The American dream, the white picket fence, your own piece of land, blah, blah, blah. It's such a mythology today. It's not what it was, and it's not even attainable for the majority of Americans anymore.
I think as the economy changes and shifts in this country, I think there'll be a large resurgence of neighborhoods as entertainment. Maybe one of the good things that come out of social cataclysms and disasters.
I think that we've become so filled with hubris in our relationship to the world, everything, that all great empire is going to go down, and we're going to go down, and how we rise up will be very interesting, whether we learn and get back in tune with nature.
I think America is going to finally deliver its contribution at the point of dissolution. What are you going to wear to the apocalypse? I have my costume all figured out.
Hey Bill, it's John Judge. It's day, whatever it is, of July, and I'm here at 3751 South Topanga Canyon, and there is a 315C cat excavator parked in the living room. Today's the day of demo. It doesn't seem as sad to see it being torn down as it has been just seeing it sit empty every day when you drive by.
I just can't stand to see stuff like this just get crunched by the bulldozers. In fact, the idea I had that would have really been smart for them to do, they could have had an open house for scavengers down here, call it a recycling operation, charge people $20 a head, maybe, and use that to buy an insurance policy, and let them come down and take anything they wanted. And just imagine how much landfill space that would save.
I think it's a struggle in this country, and it always has been. It always has been how to handle the blessings of the resources and the wealth of this country without being consumed with it as the essence of life.
It is inherently empowering to be a creator. When you are a creator, whether you're a poet or an actress or a filmmaker or a musician or what have you, you are aligning yourself, you are archetyped with the creator. Like in the same way being a destroyer is empowering in a very similar way. And if given the option, I think most people choose to create. I think it's a bad second choice to dominate, to destroy. It seems more powerful because it's faster. It takes time and concentration and sacrifice and commitment to really create. And it just takes, a badge and a weapon, to rip something apart.
This has really born me to become who I am, this place. This place made me, there's no question. The influence is so powerful in how how I see the world. And what's really becoming extinct is a different way of life, which is really what America was about.